Okay, listeners, strap yourselves in because we are headed straight into the heart of Kenyan politics. And this isn't some quiet backroom deal. We are talking impeachment accusations, a nation on edge, and enough twists and turns to make your head spin. You guys sent us tons of stuff on this, articles, parliamentary records, even some seriously fired up podcast clips, all about the potential impeachment of Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua.
What's really wild is how quickly this is all happening. I mean, he's only 2 years into his term, and they're already trying to kick him out. It's got everyone talking.
Talk about a wild ride. And Gachagua, he's definitely not backing down. He's out there calling this whole thing a public lynching, a total witch hunt. But what I find really interesting is that he's saying this is about more than just him, right? He's making this about the very idea of Kenyan democracy.
Yeah, he's claiming that this is straight up trying to overturn the will of the people, that it's ignoring the whole democratic process. And he's not just making vague accusations, he's pointing to specific instances of corruption, abuse of power, even saying that they're accusing him of going after the president.
All right, so let's get into it. What are the actual accusations? Is there fire under all this smoke?
Well, some of the accusations are definitely attention grabbing. Like, there are all these questions about Gachagua's finances, properties, a beach resort that have raised some eyebrows. People are saying he got all this after he became deputy president, which, hints at some shady business and misuse of public funds.
So using his position to get rich, that's not good.
Right. And then there's this whole thing about a road that was, shall we say, conveniently paved right before a royal visit. Talk about suspicious timing,
It's
right?
like they're not even trying to hide it. But Gachagua is saying all of these accusations are totally bogus. So what's his side of the story?
And that's where things get really interesting. We'll get into his defense in the next part, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Let's just say, Gachagua does not hold back.
So we've got this mountain of accusations against Gachagua, but he's saying it's all just political theater. What's his side of the story?
Well, he's got an answer for everything. Let's take that Olive Garden hotel, for example. Gachagua says it was part of his brother's estate, his brother who died. He says he was named executor of the will and had to manage all the stuff in it, including the hotel.
So it's a case of mistaken identity, he's saying.
That's his story. He even claims he sold some of those properties already and followed the will's instructions about what to do with the money. He got into a lot of detail about this during the parliamentary proceedings, even talked about how he was being forced to reveal all this private family stuff to defend himself.
Well, I bet that didn't feel great, having to air all your family's dirty laundry like that. But what about those shady business deals? You mentioned something about mosquito nets.
Right. This one involves a company that Gachagua's sons run. They were trying to get this huge contract, we're talking billions of shillings, to supply mosquito nets to the Kenya Medical Supplies Authority.
Okay, so we're talking family members, government contracts. This is sounding a little suspicious.
And this is where Gachagua's explanation gets even more interesting. He says his sons weren't even the ones bidding on the contract directly, that they were just acting as, local agents for some big international company, helping them navigate the whole Kenyan system.
So just middlemen, not mastermind.
Exactly. He even started talking about technical things like bid bonds, trying to prove that his sons weren't the main players in this whole deal.
It's a real he said, she said situation.
Sure.
But even if we believe everything Gachagua is saying about all that, there's still the fact that he's out there publicly fighting with the president, which doesn't exactly scream unified government, does it?
You're right. It's not just about these individual accusations anymore. It's about the bigger picture, all the political stuff happening around it. And that's what makes this whole thing really fascinating. Like, for example, Gachagua was really vocal about how much he opposed those Nairobi River evictions, which, were a major part of the president's whole agenda.
Didn't he promise that there wouldn't be any forced evictions? That's quite a turnaround.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder how well these two are getting along. And then there's his whole one man, one vote, one shilling comment.
Ah, yes. The, quote, heard round the world, as they say. What was he talking about with that one?
Well, Gachagua claims he was just saying that money should be divided fairly, that places with more people should get more of the budget.
Which sounds totally reasonable on the surface, right? But I could see how people could hear that and get worried, especially in a country with a history of ethnic tension.
Totally. It plays right into people's fears about power and favoritism. And then there's the most interesting part of Gachagua's whole defense, the shares.
Here we go.
He's claiming that he's just trying to maintain these behind-the-scenes agreements about how power gets divided up within the ruling coalition.
Things are getting juicy. Okay, we need to unpack these shares
Yeah.
because I think we're getting to the heart of all this drama.
We are, and that's where we'll pick up in part 3, because this is where it gets really, really interesting.
Okay, so we left off with Gachagua dropping this bombshell about the shares, these secret agreements about how power gets divvied up in the ruling coalition. It sounds like we stumbled onto something much bigger than we thought.
Oh, absolutely. This is where the whole thing goes from, like, a small tremor to a full-blown political earthquake, you know.
Yeah.
Gachagua's whole defense rests on this idea that he's just trying to uphold these power-sharing deals that they made within the Kenya Kwanza coalition before any of this happened. He even showed everyone some documents, agreements with signatures and everything about how positions and resources were supposed to be split up among the different factions.
Wow, so it's like he's saying, if I'm going down, I'm taking all of you with me. He is not messing around.
It's a huge gamble, that's for sure. On the one hand, he's playing to the sense of fairness. Like, he's trying to show how shady and kind of dirty coalition politics can be. He's implying that these backroom deals are totally normal, and that he's only being singled out because he dared to talk about them. But on the other hand, this could totally backfire. Publicly airing your dirty laundry like this, it makes you look bad, like you can't be trusted. And it could destabilize the entire government.
Yeah, and don't forget about the president in all of this. He has been totally silent. What do you make of that?
It's impossible to say for sure what's going on behind the scenes, but Ruto's silence is definitely strategic. He's got to be thinking about every possible scenario. If he publicly supports Gachagua, it could make him look bad, like he supports corruption, and alienate important people. But if he distances himself too much from Gachagua, then what? Then Gachagua might decide to reveal even more juicy information about what really goes on in the coalition. It's such a delicate situation.
It's like we're watching a political thriller in slow motion. And we have no idea what's going to happen next. But this whole thing raises some really important points about Kenyan democracy. I mean, if these shares actually exist, then what does that say about transparency? What about accountability? Are the people in charge actually looking out for everyday Kenyans? Or are they just playing these power games and using everyone else's pawns?
Those are the questions, aren't they? And they're not easy to answer. Some people would say that these power-sharing deals are just unavoidable, that they're how coalition governments work, you know, a necessary evil. But then others might say that this whole thing just proves how corrupt Kenyan politics really is, that it's all about getting ahead, even if it means screwing everyone else over.
And how does this affect regular people?
That's what we have to remember. If all of this drama paralyzes the government or leads to instability, everyday Kenyans are the ones who will be hurting. The Fanya Mambo Africa podcast actually made a really good point about this. They said that regardless of what happens with this impeachment, the damage is done. People just don't trust the government anymore.
That's a really good point. This isn't a game.
Right.
These are real people's lives we're talking about.
Exactly. And it just shows how important it is to have a strong judicial system that works, a free press that can report on whatever it wants, and engage citizens who aren't afraid to hold the powerful accountable.
It's a lot to think about, that's for sure. Every time we think we've gotten to the bottom of this, it gets even more complex, more questions than answers. This whole Gachagua impeachment thing is full of twists and turns that nobody saw coming.
And we're not even close to the end. Will Gachagua survive this? What's going to happen to his relationship with President Ruto? Is any of this going to lead to real change? Or are we just going to see the same things happen again and again? We'll have to wait and see.
One thing is for sure we'll be watching closely. And listeners, we want to hear what you think. What do you think this whole thing is really about? Let us know on social media. Until next time, keep diving deep.